this is the result of the work of Russian strategic bombers with cruise missiles on Ukraine.
We occupied General 244.
It worked. Relays worked. Accepted. Worked.
Speed added speed.
Launching them by the hundreds initially at the beginning of the invasion, today the number of missiles in one raid barely even reaches a dozen missiles. In recent months, strategic aviation has not been used by the Russians at all in the skies. This primarily concerns the Tu-95. They are the backbone of the Russian air fleet, capable of carrying nuclear weapons over thousands of kilometers, lifting up to a dozen missiles and several tons of bombs at once. That's according to the documents. But what is really happening today with the Russian tools? And is the West really so helpless against Soviet technology from the early 50s? This is what we'll discuss today in Arsenal. The strategic bomber missile carrier Tu-95, developed in the mid-20th century, was the USSR's response to the American B-52 Stratofortress. At that time, the Soviet aircraft met all the requirements of the Cold War. It was capable of flying thousands of kilometers and launching nuclear weapons at any point in the USA. Its pride was its four extremely remarkable and notable turboprop engines. The Tu-95 is still considered the only serial bomber and the fastest, most powerful and renowned aircraft here with this type of engine in aviation history. However, despite all the power of Soviet propaganda, decades later it can be stated Anta Tupolev never managed to surpass the American designers. Even though the two aircraft was released a year later, it still turned out to be slower. The maximum speed of the 95th is 890 kilometers per hour, compared to 1050 for the B-52. The combat range is also less, 6,500 compared to 7,210 kilometers. The maximum flight altitude is 12,000 meters compared to more than 16,500 for the American. In terms of the weight of the armament that the Tu-95 can carry on board, it loses by half, 12 tons compared to more than 30. The Soviet aircraft even simply loses to the USA in terms of the number of units produced, 500 units compared to 744 American ones. One of the few aspects in which the Tu-95 surpassed its Western opponent is flight range. This was achieved thanks to the incredibly efficient and effective very turboprop engine, which remarkably consumes significantly less fuel in comparison to the jet engine installed on the B-52 and to other engines. However, the huge propellers significantly increased the aircraft's radar profile, allowing it to be detected on average half an hour earlier than the American one. Moreover, the engine D made the Tu-95 one of the loudest aircraft in the world, which also does not aid in stealth operations. But the main point is not even this. What matters is the condition in which these aircraft have survived to the present day. After all, as you might already be aware, the last such strategic bomber aircraft model was produced back in 1992. Analyzing the missile strikes on Ukraine in 2023, analysts concluded that technically the aircraft are far from being in ideal condition.
The launch was carried out simultaneously by 10 aircraft. The Tu-95 MS can carry up to 8 missiles, and a total of 23 were launched at Ukraine. The point is that the tactical and technical characteristics supposedly allow for carrying 8 missiles. But the technical condition of this scrap metal, with the youngest being 40 years old, actually doesn't allow for a full load.
These were the spring attacks. By summer, it certainly and indeed turned out that not every aircraft that took off to attack Ukrainians was in fact capable of firing. The Russians even specifically launch over the Caspian Sea so that if anything happens, the missiles fall into the sea rather than on the heads of Russians.
In principle, they could have lifted 2 bombers and dropped them. They lifted 11. This means it indicates that these Tu-95s are simply falling apart on them. These are very old planes. that already have certain Sigovan structural deficiencies, and they can now lift a maximum of 1 or 2 missiles per plane. This also applies to the Tu-92M3. That is, they can carry 2 KH-22 missiles, but they had to lift 6 planes to drop 4 missiles. Well, most likely 2 missiles fell along the way.
By the way, the Russian pilots decided to add extra thousands of kilometers before launching, thereby reducing the lifespan of the already not-so-young planes for a reason. Previously, the Tu aircraft were comfortably based at the Diaghilevo and Engels air bases 700 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. But in December of last year, Ukrainian Strij drones arrived there. In these attacks, 3 Tu-95 bombers and 1 Tu-22M3 were destroyed, but the destruction of Russian aviation did not end there. In August of this year, explosions occurred at the Soltsi and Shaikovka air bases. These encounters resulted in the loss of 3 more Tu-22M3 bombers.
Absolutely small drones. They are about this size. I am telling you openly because according to our information, the Russian investigative authorities clearly understood where they were launched from. Therefore, there is no point in hiding it.
Having lost about a dozen strategic bombers destroyed and damaged, the Russians began actively seeking a solution to protect the remaining aircraft. The pinnacle of Russian ingenuity is captured thus in these satellite images of the Engels air base. Everything here is literally perfect. Firstly, the planes drawn on the asphalt that do not cast shadows in sunny weather. Also, the decision to cover real planes with car tires remains unclear. Thus, the Russians apparently also hope to protect the aircraft from enemy drones. However, they only managed to elicit mockery online.
This is an entirely new Tu-95 with the tire system. Don't be confused by the name, as it was chosen due to the similarity of the system's cell to a tire. Its development was carried out considering modern requirements and under conditions of maximum cost reduction and unification. It meets all current demands and is protected against any modern means of attack.
Joking aside, it must indeed be acknowledged that the presence of the Tu-95 with the Russians still poses a significant threat to Ukraine. The Kremlin also understands their reliance on bombers. Therefore, there are already known instances where half-dismantled planes are taken apart for parts, and through such aviation cannibalism, several half-alive carcasses are turned into one that is still capable of taking off and launching a missile. Surely, the Russians will try to continue this practice in the future. However, it should be understood that with each new flight, the lifespan of such Soviet legacy is reduced. Russia simply cannot produce new strategic aircraft or properly maintain the old ones under the conditions of sanctions. And there is a high probability that it will never be able to again. Well, subscribe to our channel and like this video so you don't miss new episodes of Arsenal.